There is a quiet hunger in the human soul, a longing, not just for safety, but for deep refuge. Not the kind we build with walls, wealth, or control, but the kind that holds us together when everything else begins to fall apart. Many of us move through life armored on the outside, yet fragile within, shaped by fear, loss, and the stories we carry from our wounds. And in that fragile space, we search for protection, for meaning, for something unshakable. Psalm 91 speaks directly into that human condition. It doesn't deny fear, it meets it. It doesn't promise a life without storms, it offers a presence within them. What if the shield we're seeking isn't external, but a relationship, a connection with the divine that restores safety not just around us, but within us? This is where healing begins, when we feel held, seen, and protected at the deepest level of our being. The human need for true safety runs far deeper than the surface-level protections we often rely on. It is not simply about having a roof over our heads, financial stability, or physical security, although these things matter. At its core, this need is emotional, psychological, and spiritual. It begins in our earliest experiences, in the moments when we first learned whether the world was a place of comfort or a place of threat. When a child feels consistently held, understood, and protected, a foundation of safety is formed within them. But when that sense of security is fractured through neglect, loss, fear, or instability, the nervous system adapts by remaining on guard, always anticipating danger, even when none is present. As adults, many of us continue to carry that internal state. We may appear strong, independent, and in control, yet underneath there is a quiet vigilance, a subtle anxiety that never fully settles. We try to manage it in different ways. Some seek control over every aspect of life, believing that certainty will bring peace. Others distract themselves with constant activity, avoiding stillness because it brings them face to face with their inner unrest. Some place their sense of safety in relationships, hoping another person can provide what they feel is missing within. Yet none of these external strategies fully satisfy the deeper longing, because the need for true safety is not just about circumstances, it is about an inner state of being. Fear plays a significant role in this. It is not merely an emotion, it is a signal shaped by past experiences, conditioning how we perceive the present. When fear becomes chronic, it distorts reality, making the world seem more dangerous than it actually is. This doesn't mean the fear is irrational, it often has roots in very real pain, but it does mean that our sense of safety becomes disconnected from the truth of the present moment. We may find ourselves reacting to old wounds rather than current realities, trapped in patterns that keep us from experiencing peace. For safety. In many cultures, strength is associated with independence and self-reliance, leaving little room for admitting that we need protection, reassurance, or comfort. Yet denying this need does not eliminate it, it only pushes it deeper, where it continues to influence our thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. True strength, in many ways, begins with recognizing this need rather than suppressing it. What makes this search for safety so complex is that it cannot be fully met by anything temporary or external. Material security can be lost, relationships can change, and circumstances can shift unexpectedly. If our sense of safety depends entirely on these factors, it remains fragile. This is why many people who seem to have everything still feel an underlying sense of unease. The external conditions may be stable, but the internal experience is not. At a deeper level, the human need for true safety is a longing to feel grounded, held, and secure in a way that is not easily shaken. It is about finding a place within ourselves or beyond ourselves where fear does not dominate, where we are not constantly bracing for impact. It is about experiencing a sense of trust, not necessarily that nothing bad will ever happen, but that we are not alone in facing whatever comes. The tension between fear and faith is not a battle that happens somewhere outside of us, it unfolds quietly within the human heart. Fear is immediate, instinctive, and deeply rooted in our biology. It is the mind's way of trying to protect us, scanning for danger, anticipating harm, and preparing us to react. Faith, on the other hand, is not automatic. It is not loud or forceful. It is a choice, often subtle, that requires awareness and intention. Where fear contracts, faith expands. Where fear narrows our vision, faith invites us to see beyond what is immediately in front of us. For many people, fear becomes the dominant voice because it is familiar. It is shaped by past experiences, disappointments, betrayals, and moments when life felt overwhelming or unsafe. These experiences leave imprints, teaching us sometimes unconsciously that the world is unpredictable and that we must stay alert to survive. Over time, fear stops being a temporary response and becomes a constant state. It influences decisions, relationships, and even the way we interpret neutral situations. A delayed message feels like rejection, uncertainty feels like danger, and silence feels like abandonment. Faith does not deny these experiences. It does not dismiss pain or pretend that life is free from hardship. Instead, it offers a different posture toward them. Faith is the quiet willingness to trust that there is something greater at work, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. It is not about having all the answers, it is about choosing not to let fear be the only voice that guides us. This can feel uncomfortable because it requires letting go of the illusion of control. Fear often convinces us that if we think enough, plan enough, or worry enough, we can prevent negative outcomes. Faith asks us to release that grip, to accept uncertainty without being consumed by it. There is also a psychological dimension to this inner battle. Fear activates the body's stress response, keeping the nervous system in a heightened state. When this becomes chronic, it shapes our perception of reality. We begin to expect the worst, to assume that things will go wrong, and to protect ourselves preemptively. Faith, in contrast, has a regulating effect. It calms the nervous system not because it guarantees safety in the external world, but because it fosters an internal sense of stability. It allows us to respond rather than react, to pause rather than panic. One of the challenges is that fear often disguises itself as logic. It presents arguments that seem reasonable, preparing for the worst, avoiding risk, staying guarded. And while there is wisdom and caution, there is a point where it becomes limiting. Faith does not eliminate caution, but it prevents it from turning into paralysis. It creates space for hope, for openness, and for the possibility that things can unfold in ways we cannot predict. This inner conflict is ongoing. It is not resolved once and for all. There are moments when fear feels overwhelming, when it takes over our thoughts and actions. And there are moments when faith quietly reasserts itself, reminding us that we are not defined by our fears. The practice lies in recognizing which voice we are listening to and gently shifting our attention. It is not about forcing fear away, but about not allowing it to dominate completely. In that space, even if small, faith begins to grow, offering a different way of being in the world. One that is not driven solely by the need to protect, but also by the willingness to trust God. As refuge is often misunderstood as a place of escape, a way to avoid the harsh realities of life. Many people approach the idea of refuge with the hope that it will remove difficulty, silence pain, or shield them from every form of struggle. But this expectation, while deeply human, can lead to confusion and disappointment when life continues to unfold with its inevitable challenges. The concept of refuge, especially in a spiritual sense, is not about avoidance, it is about presence. It is about finding a grounded, unshakable center even while the storm continues around us. When we think of escape, we imagine leaving something behind, distancing ourselves from discomfort, or numbing what feels overwhelming. Escape often involves denial, distraction, or withdrawal. It can take many forms: overworking, constant busyness, emotional detachment, or even spiritual bypassing, where faith is used to suppress rather than process real human emotions. While these strategies may offer temporary relief, they do not address the deeper layers of pain or fear. In fact, they often reinforce the very patterns that keep us feeling unsafe or unsettled. Refuge, in contrast, invites us to stay present. It does not ask us to pretend that everything is fine or that suffering does not exist. Instead, it offers a space where we can bring our fear, our grief, and our uncertainty without being overwhelmed by them. In this sense, God as refuge is not a distant concept, but a relational experience. It is the sense that we are held, that we are not alone in what we are facing, and that there is a source of strength available to us that does not depend on our circumstances changing immediately. There is a profound psychological shift that occurs when we move from seeking escape to embracing refuge. When we are trying to escape, we remain in resistance. We fight against what is, wishing it were different, often adding an extra layer of suffering to an already difficult situation. This resistance can create tension in the body and mind, keeping us stuck in cycles of stress and frustration. Refuge, however, allows for acceptance, not in the sense of resignation, but in the sense of acknowledging reality as it is in this moment. From that place, there is more clarity, more capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Faith plays a central role in this understanding. To see God as refuge requires trusting that presence is more powerful than avoidance. It means believing that even in the midst of uncertainty, there is a stability that can be accessed. This does not remove pain, but it transforms our relationship to it. Instead of feeling consumed by our experiences, we begin to observe them, to move through them with a sense of support rather than isolation. There is also an element of surrender involved. Not surrender as defeat, but as a release of the need to control every outcome. When we hold tightly to the idea that life must unfold in a certain way for us to feel safe, we create constant pressure within ourselves. Refuge invites us to loosen that grip, to trust that we can endure, adapt, and even grow through what we face. It shifts the focus from controlling the external world to cultivating an inner steadiness that is not easily shaken. Trusting divine protection in uncertainty is one of the most challenging aspects of the human experience because uncertainty itself disrupts our sense of control. The mind naturally seeks predictability. It wants clear answers, defined outcomes, and reassurance that everything will unfold according to plan. When those elements are missing, the mind fills the gap with fear, imagining worst-case scenarios in an attempt to prepare for what might go wrong. This is not a flaw, it is a protective mechanism. Yet when uncertainty becomes prolonged, this mechanism can become exhausting, leaving us in a constant state of tension and anticipation. In these moments, the idea of divine protection can feel distant or even abstract. It is easy to trust when life is stable, when things are going as expected, when outcomes are favorable. But when circumstances shift, when answers are unclear, or when we face situations beyond our control, trust is tested at a deeper level. It is no longer about intellectual belief, it becomes an emotional and psychological process. The question is no longer, do I believe in protection, but can I feel safe even when I don't know what will happen next? There is a subtle but important distinction between certainty and trust. Certainty relies on knowing the outcome. Trust exists without that knowledge. Many people attempt to build trust by seeking signs, guarantees, or reassurances that things will work out in a specific way. But this approach often leads back to anxiety because it keeps the focus on controlling the future. Divine protection, however, is not necessarily about ensuring that nothing difficult will occur. It is about the presence and support that accompany us through whatever does occur. From a psychological perspective, uncertainty activates the same systems in the brain that responds to threat. The body becomes alert, the mind becomes hyper-focused, and there is a tendency to either overanalyze or avoid. Trusting in divine protection does not instantly switch off these responses, but it introduces a different way of relating to them. Instead of being completely driven by fear, there is a parallel awareness, a reminder that uncertainty does not equal danger, and that not knowing is not the same as being unsafe. This shift requires practice. It involves gently bringing the mind back from catastrophic thinking to a more grounded state. It means noticing when fear is projecting into the future and choosing, even briefly, to return to the present moment. In that present moment, there is often more stability than the mind assumes. Trust grows not through grand gestures, but through small, repeated choices to remain open rather than closed, to stay engaged rather than withdrawn. There is also an element of humility in trusting divine protection. Requires acknowledging the limits of our understanding. We do not always see the full picture, and we cannot predict every outcome. This can feel uncomfortable, especially in a world that values control and certainty. Yet it is within this acknowledgement that a different kind of strength emerges. It is the strength of allowing, of being supported, rather than solely relying on our own efforts. Over time, this trust can reshape how we experience uncertainty. Instead of viewing it purely as a threat, it becomes a space where growth, transformation, and deeper connection can occur. It does not eliminate fear entirely, but it changes its role. Fear becomes one voice among many, rather than the dominant force. Alongside it, there is a quieter voice, a sense of reassurance that, even without clear answers, there is a presence that remains constant, offering guidance, support, and protection in ways that may not always be immediately visible. Healing through spiritual surrender is often misunderstood because the word surrender can evoke ideas of weakness, passivity, or giving up. In reality, true surrender is neither defeat nor resignation. It is a conscious and courageous release of the need to control everything. It is the recognition that while we have influence over our choices and actions, we do not have absolute control over outcomes, timing, or the behavior of others. This realization can feel unsettling at first, especially for those who have learned to cope with life by holding tightly to control as a way of creating safety. Many people develop patterns of control as a response to earlier experiences of unpredictability, pain, or instability. When life has felt unsafe, controlling what we can becomes a way to restore a sense of order. We plan, we anticipate, we try to manage every detail in the hope that it will prevent future discomfort. While this approach can be useful in certain situations, it often comes at a cost. It creates internal pressure, constant vigilance, and an underlying fear that if we let go even slightly, everything will fall apart. Spiritual surrender invites a different approach. It does not ask us to abandon responsibility or stop making efforts. Instead, it encourages us to distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. We continue to act, to make decisions, and to engage with life, but we release the excessive attachment to specific outcomes. This release is not easy because it challenges deeply ingrained habits of thinking and behaving. It requires us to face uncertainty without the usual defenses, to allow space for things to unfold in ways we may not fully understand. There is a profound psychological shift that occurs in this process. When we are tightly controlling, the mind is often in a state of tension, constantly scanning for potential problems and trying to solve them in advance. This can lead to anxiety, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. Surrender, on the other hand, introduces a sense of openness. It allows the nervous system to soften, reducing the need for constant hypervigilance. This does not mean that challenges disappear, but our relationship to them changes. We become less reactive and more responsive, less driven by fear and more guided by clarity. Spiritual surrender also involves trust that there is a greater wisdom or order beyond our immediate perception. This trust does not require us to understand everything that happens. In fact, it often grows precisely in moments when understanding is limited. It is the quiet acceptance that life can move in unexpected directions, and that those directions may still hold meaning or purpose, even if they are not immediately apparent. Emotionally, surrender creates space for healing because it allows suppressed feelings to surface without resistance. When we are constantly trying to control our experience, we often push away discomfort, avoiding grief, fear, or vulnerability. Surrender makes room for these emotions to be felt and processed. It is in this space that healing begins, not by forcing change, but by allowing what is already present to be acknowledged and integrated. There is also a relational aspect to spiritual surrender. It deepens the connection between the individual and the divine, transforming faith from an abstract belief into a lived experience. Instead of relying solely on personal effort, there is a sense of being supported, guided, and held. This does not eliminate responsibility, but it balances it with reliance, creating a partnership rather than isolation. Living under God's shield daily is not a single decision made once, but an ongoing practice that unfolds in the small, ordinary moments of life. It is easy to speak about divine protection in abstract terms, yet the real challenge lies in embodying that awareness consistently when the day begins, when stress arises, when uncertainty interrupts our plans, and even when nothing particularly dramatic is happening. It is within these everyday experiences that the concept of God's shield becomes either a distant idea or a lived reality. For many people, daily life is filled with subtle pressures, responsibilities, expectations, interactions, and internal dialogues that shape how they feel and respond. Without awareness, these pressures accumulate, creating a sense of overwhelm or disconnection. Living under God's shield means bringing a different quality of attention into these moments. It is the quiet recognition that protection is not something we step into only during crisis, but something we remain connected to throughout the day. This connection is less about constant conscious effort and more about a gentle returning, again and again, to a sense of trust and presence. One of the key aspects of this practice is awareness of the inner state. The mind tends to wander into worry about the future or rumination about the past, both of which can pull us away from the present moment. When this happens, the feeling of safety diminishes because the mind is engaging with imagined threats or unresolved experiences. Returning to the present is a way of reconnecting with the sense of being held. It is not about forcing the mind to be still, but about noticing where it has gone and softly bringing it back, allowing the body and mind to settle. There is also a behavioral dimension to living under this sense of protection. It influences how we speak, how we respond to others, and how we handle challenges. When a person feels internally secure, their reactions tend to be less defensive and more grounded. They are less likely to be driven by fear or urgency and more able to act with patience and clarity. This does not mean they never experience stress or frustration, but those emotions do not take over completely. There is a buffer, a space between stimulus and response, where conscious choice becomes possible. Another important element is consistency. It is easy to feel connected to a sense of divine protection during moments of reflection, prayer, or calm. The difficulty arises when life becomes busy or chaotic. In those moments, old patterns can quickly return: reactivity, anxiety, or a sense of isolation. Living under God's shield daily means integrating that awareness into all contexts, not just the peaceful ones. It involves brief pauses, small reminders, and intentional shifts in attention that help maintain the connection, even when external conditions are less than ideal. Over time, this practice reshapes the internal landscape. The nervous system begins to associate daily experiences with a greater sense of safety, reducing the baseline level of stress. The mind becomes less inclined to jump to worst-case scenarios, and the body becomes less tense in response to uncertainty. This does not happen instantly, but through repetition. Each moment of returning, each choice to trust rather than react, strengthens this new pattern. There is also a quiet transformation in how challenges are perceived. Instead of being seen purely as threats, they begin to be experienced as part of a larger process. This does not remove difficulty, but it reduces the sense of being overwhelmed by it. There is a growing recognition that protection does not always mean avoidance of hardship, but the presence of support within it, allowing a person to move through experiences with a steadiness that was not previously available.